First Things, episode number 12.
I seem to be lost.
And so you're working around the clock so you don't take time for yourself to feel like an actual human being.
I used to feel like no matter how hard I worked, I was just spinning my wheels.
Trying to be perfect, we try to have everything in place at one point in time, and we can't.
Well, hello everyone. Welcome back to First Things, the podcast dedicated to practical productivity based on modern research. My name is Brandon Vaughn. It's my goal to help you apply productive solutions to your life to help you live with less stress, greater passion, and amazing results. Welcome back. Today, we are talking about perfectionism. It is very much an extension of what we talked about in episode 10 regarding the fear of failure. Now, perfectionism is often mistaken for being perfect or doing something perfectly. However, that is often not what most people think in reality. Perfectionism involves putting pressure on ourselves to meet high standards, which then powerfully influences the way we think about ourselves. Researchers have shown that parts of perfectionism are helpful and parts are unhelpful. So today, my goal is to help you identify and work on those unhelpful parts so that you can get satisfaction from your achievements and lead a more fulfilling life. This will involve setting appropriate goals and standards for yourself, making it more likely that you'll achieve your goals and experience a sense of fulfillment rather than feeling frustrated and blaming yourself all the time for not getting things perfect. Now, there's a big difference between the healthy and helpful pursuit of excellence and the unhealthy and unhelpful striving for perfection. So that is what today's episode is about. So what do we mean by perfectionism? I doubt many of us actually think anyone can be 100% perfect. It just isn't possible. And I've never really met anyone who thought it was. Some might not even see perfectionism as being bad. They might say, well, I like to do things well. I get pleasure out of achieving what others can't do. It makes me feel special. I like to go to bed feeling that no task has been undone. I get satisfaction knowing that I've tried my hardest. I like being the top of my class. I like being efficient. I like being organized. I like being prepared for every event. I never lose anything because I am so well organized. Well, perfectionism is often mistakenly seen in our society as desirable or even necessary for success. However, recent studies have shown that perfectionistic attitudes actually interfere with success. To see why perfectionism is less than ideal, we need a working definition of perfectionism. Listen to this brief excerpt from Dr. Martin Antony, who's a director of the Anxiety Research and Treatment Lab at Ryerson University, and he will talk about a general definition of perfectionism.
According to David Burns, a perfectionist is someone whose standards are high beyond reach or reason, and who strains compulsively and unremittingly toward impossible goals, and who measures their own worth entirely in terms of productivity and accomplishment. So you can imagine, in this case, perfectionism is a problem. First of all, the person is setting high standards, which is not in itself a problem, but the standards are impossibly high. They're standards that the person can't possibly meet. Second, the person is measuring their entire self-worth in terms of whether they meet these standards that they can't possibly meet. So you can imagine if that's the case, you're going to feel depressed, you're going to feel anxious. The perfectionism is going to be a problem for you.
So in perfectionism, we are relentlessly pursuing some extremely high standard that many outsiders would probably deem extreme. Even more so, we are basing our worth and our identity upon our success to achieve that standard. Failure to meet that standard will often send us into a spiral. We attack our very purpose, our very person. Our very identity becomes unraveled when we fail. Now, it isn't necessarily bad to have high standards. Having goals helps you achieve things in life. That's good. But when these goals are actually unachievable or only achievable at a great cost, it makes it very difficult to feel good about yourself. This is when perfectionism can be problematic. Also, when we base our worth on perfectionism, that's another really negative thing. Because when you fail, who are you at that point? And that's another big problem. That is why perfectionism is not our ideal state. This perspective of life is directly tied often to our worth and our identity. So the bigger problem is that perfectionism often results in negative self-evaluation when those standards are not met. In other words, the striving to achieve high standards isn't really the issue, but it's the negative responses to perceived failure that's regarded as the problem. If our self-worth is overly dependent on striving and achievement, this model suggests that we not only set standards accordingly, but also experience some form of cognitive bias in the process. We see our world and ourselves differently. If we don't meet these standards, we then become self-critical, and this, of course, impacts our own self-worth. On the other hand, if we successfully meet these standards, our perfectionism basically reappraises itself and becomes even more demanding as we respond by setting maybe even higher standards. As a result, here are some consequences of perfectionism. We can be constantly setting higher standards and becoming more and more stressed out because of that. Or oppositely, we can become indecisive. We can procrastinate. We can constantly need reassurance. We can constantly not know when to stop. And we can do avoidance, and we can become sluggish and slow. All of these things are consequences of having a perfectionistic attitude. Gordon Fayette, a psychology professor at York University in Canada, says this: "It's natural to be perfectionistic in the thing that matters the most, like your job. If you're a surgeon, there's no room for error. But you don't want that same person to be going home and using those same standards to evaluate family members, which is only going to cause stress. It has to generalize." Now, there is some controversy in research on perfectionism, to be honest with you. There are some scientists that have argued that a subset of these high achievers could be classified as what they call positive perfectionists, those who reap the benefits of perfectionism without falling victim to the negative consequences. However, others say that while perfectionism might seem to be advantageous to certain situations, it always has this dark side that inevitably rears its ugly head. For instance, a perfectionist might seem fine under normal circumstances, but they can quickly lose control under stress. The research on positive perfectionists isn't conclusive yet. But quite honestly, I do like the idea. I like the thought that maybe it's possible to avoid the negative consequences, but regardless, we want to avoid with realistic standards here. So where is the battle? Well, I've said many times in this podcast, but I will repeat it once more. The key battle is in our thoughts. Perfectionism begins with a lot of stinking thinking that we have refused to challenge, and now they've produced stuck emotions. Here are some of those thoughts. See if any of these resonate with you. Doing good isn't good enough. I have to do better. I can't have others thinking poorly of me. If I make a mistake, then I will be rejected. I must be prepared for all possible outcomes. I can't afford to fail. What will they think of me? I can't afford for someone else to do this because they will screw it up. My work is never good enough. I must be perfect, or people will realize what I'm really like. Now, do any of those thoughts resonate with you? These thoughts generally stem from a fear of failure, or possibly from a fear of rejection, which we haven't talked about yet. Imagine you hold a strong belief or standard like this: I must never make mistakes. This is a conclusion that you've developed following certain experiences, probably when you were younger. But how does this affect your life now? So if you hold the belief, I must never make mistakes, that means you will probably look out for any mistakes or signs of failure so you can correct these immediately. For example, you might repeatedly look through a report for errors. You probably will not pay any attention to your success, and it's unlikely that you will acknowledge the times that you have been doing an acceptable job. Those times are never really given a second thought. They are irrelevant to your life because what really matters, your paradigm, your mindset, is you must not make mistakes. And that's the only thing you're focused on. Therefore, you only pay attention to negative incidents that confirm your belief. You probably also have an extreme view of what success and failure is with no middle ground. You might easily jump to the extreme conclusion that you have failed at something when realistically you might not have done that bad at all. For example, and I can relate to this. Gosh, how much can I relate to this? I didn't get an A on the assignment. I got a B minus, and that is terrible. And I should never make a mistake like this again. I encounter students like this sometimes in math that they will say, I have a 4.0 average and I can't afford to make an A minus in this class. And I'm thinking, why? What is it about your identity that you must do this? I cannot fail. I cannot have anything less than an A. And that's just not conducive. That is not healthy. So as always, let me give you some action steps that you can take to start dealing and lessening the effects of perfectionism in your life. I'm going to give you 4 action steps today. These are a little bit longer than normal, but I'm shortening them as well. So there's only 4 today. So number 1, it all begins with our thoughts. Now, we can't get around this. Our thoughts are where we often get trapped. So if you deal with perfectionism, you need to spend some time analyzing exactly what you are thinking. In particular with perfectionism, many of us have this inner critic screaming at us in our failure. You dumb, clumsy, fat, boring, blah, blah, blah. It's this inner voice. Now, this voice often has an identity. It may be our own voice. It could be a voice of a teacher that we had, a parent, somebody. What I have found helpful is to symbolize that critic. Maybe I would write it down on a piece of paper or even draw a picture of that critic and then crumble up that piece of paper and throw it away, symbolizing my freedom from this critic. How many of you know what movie this is from?
There's something very important I forgot to tell you.
What?
Don't cross the streams.
Why?
It would be bad.
I'm fuzzy on the whole good-bad thing. What do you mean bad?
Try to imagine all life as you know it stopping instantaneously and every molecule in your body exploding at the speed of light.
Total protonic reversal. All right, that's bad. Okay. All right, important safety tip. Thanks, Egon. All right, Ray, take the left. Egon, take the right.
So that is obviously Ghostbusters, if you didn't catch on. And I've also envisioned this critic like I was starring in Ghostbusters. If you've ever seen that film, you remember that they put this trap under a ghost that they would turn on a switch and that would basically suck the ghost up. And I envision this critic as a ghost before me, taunting me, belittling me. Then in my mind, I step on the switch and watch that ghost get sucked up right before me. I visualize this. I imagine this. Now, we will talk about visualizing and imagination at some point, but everything we know as real and tangible once began as an imagination. So what are some of the stinking thinking that we're dealing with here in perfectionism? Perhaps it's something like this. If I try hard enough and I'm very careful and I follow all of the rules, everything will go right and everyone will love me and feel good. And I'll feel good all of the time. So look at your life if you think something like that. And let me ask you an honest question. How is that working out for you? Are you experiencing passion and happiness living from that vantage point? Or do you find yourself stressed out and fatigued from living that way? Identify exactly what you're thinking. You need to quiz yourself. I do this to myself all the time. I will stop myself and say, wait, okay, right now I'm leaning toward perfectionism. Now, exactly what am I thinking right now? So what are some of those stinking thoughts? Well, here's some of the ones that I come up with. All or nothing thinking, which can occur in a situation in which I view things in extremes. And how many times do I think it's either got to be all or nothing? So I can't make an A minus. An A minus is the same thing as an F, which is crazy, but it's this all or nothing thinking. Or how many of us have anticipated negative outcomes? We are fortune tellers and we just know that some negative thing is going to come. Some catastrophic outcome seems inevitable, and it usually never does. We will quickly disqualify or discount the positive. Some positive quality, some positive achievement happens, and we overlook it. we regard it as irrelevant. So we can have 99 people say, great job, this was awesome, and one person said, yeah, I think it could have been better, and that will dominate our thinking for the entire day. It's almost like a mental filter that we go about, and if something is negative, then it has permission to filter through into our emotions and our actions. But if it's positive, we just disregard it altogether. We forget the broader picture, and we overgeneralize things. So many times I will just have this sweeping negative conclusion that's just so far beyond reality. And often we get into these should and must and ought statements. We've talked about that in previous podcasts, where we should on ourselves and we ought on ourselves and we must on ourselves. And these can also trap us as well. Here is one suggested strategy for dealing with some of these thoughts. Write down your anxious thoughts. Identify any unhelpful thinking styles. The rationale is to discredit those thoughts and enhance your self-worth. Because we can come up with so many strict rules, stringent adherence to those rules. And unhelpful perfectionism thrives on absolute rules, unconditional compliance to that. And it's helpful. It's a useful start to start identifying some of those unhelpful thinking styles. You might also find it helpful to consider your response to these laws and these rules that you encounter in your everyday life. Is your adherence equally rigorous for all of them? The rationale is to identify evidence of any variation in the application of those rules. I guarantee you there are some rules that you don't follow verbatim, and you're okay with that, and the world doesn't come to an end. We also need to get beyond the fact that failure can often motivate self-criticism. This is a very common problem and something I face so many times in my own life. And here's something that has helped me. This may help you. Would you encourage your loved ones to criticize themselves? That is a great, great question to ask, because I think most of us, if we're honest, someone that we love is sitting right in front of us and they are criticizing themselves. What would most of us do? We would say, stop, quit doing this. I love you and I appreciate you and you are such a great person, and quit beating up on yourself. So if we would do that for them, why don't we do that to ourselves? So here's something to do. Think of the nicest, kindest, most understanding, supportive thing that you would say to your closest friend in a time of crisis. Now, say that to yourself. Try that. You'll be amazed at this, and it will feel very weird because we want to beat up on ourselves, especially if you deal with perfectionism. I'm not worthy of this, but reverse it and do what you would do for somebody else to yourself. And honestly, we need to learn to find some pleasure in our successes. If we haven't had the opportunity to learn this at an earlier point in our lives, success can feel quite empty. And you should try this. At the end of each day, take some time out to review the events of your day and identify anything that did not go completely wrong. It doesn't matter if it might have gone better. If it didn't go wrong, it was successful. Then make a plan to give yourself some sort of reward the following day. Think about it and look forward to it. The rationale is to behaviorally reinforce achievement by having fun. Quite naturally, we tend to put things off if we believe we're going to fail. So focus on the task, not the outcome. Stop thinking and start doing. You know, sports psychologists use this all of the time. The rationale is to adopt a certain behavior regardless of the feared consequences, in this case, failure. Sometimes the erroneous belief that failure is unavoidable leads to the task being abandoned before it's even completed. So as we've suggested already, simply keep going. You might want to take a break, write down your anxious thoughts, identify anything that's unhelpful in your thinking. And one way to deal with stinking thinking is to replace those thoughts with positive thoughts or with the truth of things. Because adults with perfectionism are often very critical of themselves, this can be a very effective way to overcome those perfectionistic thoughts, to replace those self-critical or perfectionistic thoughts with some realistic or helpful statements. It's a good idea to practice these statements on a regular basis, even if you do not believe them right away. Let me say that again. You may hear me say these statements right now, and you say, oh, but Brandon, I don't feel like that. That seems like the farthest from the truth in my life. I don't care. Say it anyway. Because if you feel that way, most likely you've got some stuck feelings in this area. And this is a way you get those feelings unstuck. You keep saying this to yourself, because I guarantee you, if we were sitting right next to each other, I would convince you that this is the truth about you. And you say, but you don't know me. I've known so many people in my life, including myself. And I would argue against myself and say, yeah, but that's not me, Brandon. You don't understand how screwed up my life is. And I've learned that I'm not as screwed up as I think that I am. Or the fact that we're all so screwed up. It's one of those two things, but you're not alone in this. And this is the truth about you. This is who you really are. So even if you don't believe them right away, enough repetition will turn these positive, realistic thoughts into a habit for you and get your feelings unstuck. So here's some examples of some of these realistic, positive statements that you should tell yourself. Nobody is perfect. Tell yourself that every single day. Nobody is perfect. Or, all I can do is my best. Say that to yourself. Tell yourself that constantly throughout the day. Or how about this? Making a mistake does not mean I'm stupid or a failure. It only means that I am like everyone else. Human. Everyone makes mistakes. Or how about this? It's okay not to be pleasant all the time. Everyone has a bad day sometimes. Or how about this? It's okay if some people don't like me. No one is liked by everyone. Remember, I told you the story of how I visualized 10 people in front of me, all of them representing the entire people I will ever face in my life. And I envision that 2 of those people just will never like me. 2 of them will love me, and then the rest are kind of indifferent to me. And although this may sound like a pessimistic way of looking at life, I think it's a very realistic and helpful way of life. I don't have to please everyone. There's going to be some people that no matter what I do, I will never please them. And I also tell myself some of the things I mentioned in my fear of failure episode. If I failed in this area, it is not an inhibitor to my success. It will be a catalyst to my success. And often talking to yourself out loud can help you calm the storm inside your brain of these thoughts that dominate you. So try it out. Try some of this out. Deal with your stinking thinking. I think it will help you quite a bit. Number 2, give yourself permission to fail. Now, we all know this, but there's nothing in this life that's perfect. Everything has something that could be improved upon. This thought of if it's not absolutely perfect, then it's a disaster approach to life is part of stinking thinking. It's a black and white type of thinking. With black and white thinking, there's no shades of gray. Everything is completely this or it's completely that. I mean, does that sound familiar to any of my perfectionistic listeners today? The trouble is that life is composed of shades of gray. If you expect perfection all of the time, then you will always be disappointed and your self-esteem will suffer. And quite honestly, I know that some of you may not appreciate this, but I think life would be completely boring if everything was always perfect. I think the flavor and the color of life comes through imperfection. The trick is to know when to be all or nothing and when to relax and see the shades of gray so that you can give yourself some credit and others for their effort and their attempt. This isn't always easy. I'm not saying it is. Sometimes maybe an all or nothing is needed in certain circumstances, but it's not needed all of the time and in every single situation. And because of that, you should learn to celebrate your mistakes. And okay, maybe celebrate's an awfully strong word. And if that is, then start with accepting your mistakes. But I do think each big blunder deserves a round of toast. Every mistake deserves its own party because almost all of them teach us a precious, rare lesson that can't be acquired by success. Let me say that again. All of them are teaching us this rare, precious, beautiful lesson that cannot be acquired by success. Nope, the embarrassment, the humiliation, the self-disgust, all of those are tools which will help us unearth the treasure, the gold. There's a song called Anthem by Leonard Cohen, which says this: "Ring the bells that still can ring. Forget your perfect offering. There is a crack in everything. That's how the light gets in." Now, this could be very hard for many of you to do, what I'm about to suggest, but do something badly. Gradual self-exposure to whatever makes us anxious is always the most powerful way of eliminating anxiety. In order to not be beaten down by imperfection, you must not only accept the imperfect, but maybe you should seek it. Intentionally create something your boss wouldn't even want to scrape off their shoes and then erase it. So you don't want to send that to your boss, but intentionally create it. If that's what you fear, then intentionally do it. And adopting this objective gives me permission to do the lousy job I'm sure that I'm going to do in an initial attempt. It gets me through the excruciating process of going from nothing to something, no matter how terrible it may be. Turning it into something better is usually less work, and you may even turn it into something good. But the first step toward achieving excellence is imperfection. So try this. Choose something you've always wanted to do. Paint, jog, whatever it is. Now set out to do this really bad. Now your inner perfectionist, that inner critic we talked about, is going to erupt in violent protest. No. But do it anyway. And if you need help, then get a buddy. Commit something with a friend that you'll both do something really terrible, then praise each other for following through. If you have the guts to do this, you'll find that contrary to what you think, people love you when you're openly imperfect. I love imperfect people. I love hanging around them. I discovered this when teaching in college, a task that I approached with little preparation, very little talent, and all the confidence of a snowball headed for a warmed-up kitchen stove. On my desk, I used to keep a box labeled criticisms and recommendations, in which students would anonymously suggest things. And there would also be teacher evaluations and things like this. And I learned to improve my teaching through my mistakes. I learned so much from students that it greatly improved my teaching very, very rapidly. And this is what happens whenever we free ourselves to grow by letting ourselves do something badly, when we're not afraid of messing up. And in doing this, experiment with your standards of success. Choose any activity, and instead of aiming for 100% perfection, try for 90% or 80% or even 60% success. This will help you to realize that the world does not end when you are not perfect. Focus on the process of doing an activity, not just on the end result. Evaluate your success not only in terms of what you accomplished, but also in terms of how much you enjoyed the task. Gosh, how much I could drill this lesson into my head. That is not the destination that matters. It's the journey. Recognize that there can be value in the process of pursuing a goal. Use any kind of feelings you have that are anxious or depressive as opportunities to ask yourself, have I set up impossible expectations for myself in this situation? And confront those fears that are behind perfectionism by asking yourself, what am I afraid of? And what is the worst thing that could happen? Recognize that many positive things can only be learned by making mistakes. When you make a mistake, ask yourself, what can I learn from this experience? More specifically, think of a recent mistake you have made and list all of the things that you can learn from it, or all of the things that you did learn from it. And above all, avoid all or nothing thinking in relation to your goals. Learn to discriminate the tasks that you want to give high priority to from those tasks that are less important to you. And on those less important tasks, choose to put forth less effort. Once you've tried these suggestions, you're likely to realize that perfectionism is not a helpful or necessary influence in your life. There are alternative ways to think that are much, much more beneficial. Not only are you more likely to achieve more without perfectionism, but you will feel better about yourself in the process. So a great piece of advice: today is a great day to make a mistake. Listen to this excellent discussion by Jennifer Gresham on a very simple rule to overcome perfectionism.
It's estimated that 30 to 50% of all scientific discoveries are, to some degree, accidental. I worked as a scientist and with some of the best scientists in the world for over 15 years, and I'd say that number is likely conservative. Here's how it happens. You go into the lab, or one of your grad students goes into the lab, to do an experiment you've done dozens of times. But you make a mistake somewhere in the procedure, and all of a sudden the results are unexpected. You can't explain them with what you know today. So you dig a little deeper, you do a few more experiments, and then eureka. And that's how discovery often happens. These moments in science are hardly ever planned or anticipated. They start with doing things a little bit differently. In fact, they often begin with a mistake. And I can't help but wonder, why don't we do the same thing with our own lives? Why don't we approach life with more curiosity and a tolerance for the unexpected? So many people are stressed out from trying to plan their day down to the last 15 minutes to squeeze the last bit of productivity and efficiency out of it. Why? It's a completely uninteresting life. It's a life devoid of surprise, and yet it's one we increasingly choose for ourselves. My daughter, who is 6 years old, said to me the other day, "Mommy, why is it that no one can make mistakes?" And she came to that question because every time she did something where I thought she should know better, I got frustrated with her. And anyone who's a parent will know what I'm talking about. They don't get dressed for school on time, or your child decides to test whether her duck can swim in circles and clogs the toilet. And frustration seemed like a pretty mild response until I realized I was killing her creativity and curiosity with my desire for efficiency and conformity. And it starts with our parents, and then it's our teachers, and then it's our bosses, and pretty soon it's ourselves, right? That voice becomes internal. And that's how we get into the mess that we're in today, where so many people are bored or disengaged in their jobs. They feel hopeless and helpless. Now, I can't let that happen to my daughter, and you shouldn't let it happen to yourself. And here's what we did. My daughter and I started a new ritual, and every morning, one of us reminds the other, it's a great day to make a mistake. It's a great day to make a mistake. That may sound a little strange because you've trained yourself to avoid mistakes at all costs, but that's where the learning is. And until you prioritize learning over performance, until you cleanse your mind of all those meaningless external measures of success and focus on what naturally piques your interest and excitement, you'll prevent yourself from having those eureka moments. I can't promise you'll win a Nobel Prize, but you'll lead one heck of a good life.
So what you might want to try is to experiment with your life. And if you want to experiment with intentionally failing or putting yourself in a situation where you don't have to be perfect, try out some of these things. So you have this belief, I cannot arrive late or people will think badly of me. So how do you address this in perfectionism? Well, you'll leave 30 minutes before you even need to, just so that you don't arrive late. So how might you experiment with this? Well, try leaving only 15 minutes before you need to and see if you still arrive on time. Most likely you still will. You don't have to go so extreme. Or how about this? If I delegate the task to someone else, they're going to get everything wrong. Everything's going to look bad, and I just need to do it myself. So what do? We end up staying up late. We don't delegate things because we don't trust the other person to do the job. Well, why don't you try this? Try letting them do it, or try letting them do part of it and see how they do. See if they do a good enough job that you wonder, why was I even worried about this in the first place? Or delegate it the day before it's due. That way you can look it over and see if everything looks right. Or how about people with weight, that they check themselves constantly about losing weight? Have I lost enough? Or maybe they never want to weigh themselves. Well, instead of weighing yourself 5 times a day or avoiding the scales at all, why don't you just weigh yourself once a day and make a note of it? And at the end of the day, you can see kind of how you've done. You can stay in connection that way, but you don't have to do either extreme in that case. The whole point in this is to isolate what you're believing, what your stinking thinking is, and experiment. Work on doing something that is less extreme. Allow yourself a chance to fail, or allow yourself a chance to just not be perfect in this situation. It doesn't mean that you necessarily have to fail, I do think that's a useful technique to force yourself to fail, to get over that fear of failure. But okay, you don't have to always go that extreme, but experiment. Most likely you don't have to be so extreme in how you handle things. There is a balance. There is a better standard that you can embrace that isn't so extreme. Number 3, baby steps. If you feel you have a problem with perfectionism, if it feels like it's crippling your life, then start small. I've talked to so many people, including myself, that we want to completely change overnight in every area of our lives. But many of us have spent 5, 10, 20 years building up a lot of stinking thinking habits and stuck emotions in this area. Quite honestly, it's going to take some time. So think of an area of low risk for you that you have some tendency of perfectionism in. It might not even be your worst area. In fact, it probably won't be your worst area. Let that area be the arena that you make your effort in. So let me give you an example with me. Let's say that I have one of my biggest hangups in wanting to do a job perfectly at work to avoid criticism since it attacks my self-worth. That's a biggie for me, let's say. Well, I'm not going to go after that first. I'm going to go after something that is less, maybe something I don't have as much tied into my self-worth. So let's say another area is I write music, and I struggle with writing something because I want it to be just right, like it will be quickly released on iTunes as soon as I finish it. Well, I don't make money off of that. I don't have as much of my self-worth based on that. So that would be where I would start. Baby steps, small risk and doable. Go after that. Learn how to deal with fear of failure in that area. Learn how I don't have to be perfect in that area. And then start expanding that. I win in that area first, then I move to the next, and then eventually I start tackling some of my bigger obstacles. And you should make a plan. For instance, if you want to be less perfectionistic at work, you want to adjust the standards you set for yourself in that area of your life. So maybe this is your current high standard. The job isn't done unless it's perfect. Well, a more reasonable standard might be, I can try to do a job well, but it does not have to be perfect. The perfectionistic behavior I'm going to be working on is that I end up checking my work 3 times, and I just go over it and I go over it. So the goal I'm going after now is that I'm only going to check my work once. And my time frame is to work on this over 1 month. I'm very specific here. I'm going after specific things. It's not this general thing of, oh, just get over it. You know, it's okay to be imperfect. No, I'm going after something very, very detailed, very specific here. And it could be that even my goal here is too ambitious. So I might need to break it into even smaller steps. So for example, maybe first for the next 2 weeks, I'm only going to check my work twice. And then once again, when I've completed the whole job. And then after that, maybe my goal is to check my work only once. And then once again, when I've completed the whole job, and I'll do that maybe for 2 weeks. Then I'll get to my ultimate goal where I'm only going to check my work once. The idea is to think small. This is what I mean by baby steps. What is one small thing that you can do to start changing your perfectionism? It might seem like a small thing, but do it. Start putting this into action. Try it out as an experiment in your life and see what happens. But most of all, do something. Would you like to write a book? Well, here's how a perfectionist would approach it. First, they would need to do research of how others did their book. They would read blogs, they would buy books about it. Then they would pick the right time of the year and wait until you had the right time to focus entirely on it. You would need to be in the right frame of mind, and just before you sit down, you need to clear yourself of all distractions so that you're in absolute peace to do the work. Well, guess what? That is never going to happen. Perfect circumstances don't exist. Unless you're flexible and accept that, you will never even get started. It's the same thing with learning languages. I've come across so many language learners, including me, that honestly believes that they have to be perfect in this, that they have to get everything right. And I've had to learn this because I'm trying to learn Greek. I've had to learn, okay, quit being so perfectionistic about this, Brandon. You don't have to have everything just right. You've got to absorb yourself in this language. And it's okay to be off here and there, but just keep moving forward. I think that's why I've started the same class 4 times in a row, because I can get into this mode of I've got to have it all down. And when I don't feel I do, then I back away from it. And now I'm saying, go forward regardless. Keep going forward. This is what it's all about. The most successful people in the world are those who make lots of mistakes consistently. Almost all of them have stumbled their way to success and failed on so many occasions, but they continue regardless. And that's why they're successful. A perfectionist would never do this. They would wait endlessly to tweak what they are working on before even thinking about showing it to someone else. Get beyond that. Start pushing yourself out. Start showing people what you can do and quit worrying about it being perfect. Go after the passion. Go after the creativity and quit worrying about everything being perfect. Now, I know what I'm saying is tough. I'm speaking to myself just as much as I am you if you're dealing with this, but I'm telling you, I've worked on this. I've gotten so much better at this, and you can do this. You can step out and realize that the creative nature of it, the passion nature of it, is so much more important than everything being right. And often the color of your life, the color on the canvas of your life, is often found in the mistakes, not in the perfection. And lastly, number 4, create a new paradigm for your life. I'm going to put up 2 charts in the show notes for this particular episode, which will be found at firstthingsproductivity.com/12. And in the first chart, this is basically the model of perfectionism, where our self-worth is overly dependent upon our standards. And we have these unrealistic, unrelenting standards of how we must do this, we should do this, we can't fail at this. And then our perfectionism behaviors start up, excessive checking, procrastination, all these things. And you'll see this once you see this flow chart. This leads into perfectionistic thinking, where we evaluate performance such as an all or nothing style. We look out for our mistakes or anything like that. Well, then we have 2 results. Either we fail to meet our standards, which results then in self-criticism, which then goes right back up to our self-worth and just destroys it. Or maybe we meet our standards, but then we decide that our original standards maybe weren't demanding enough. So then we reset our standards to be even higher. So then we go right back to our perfectionistic behaviors and thinking. So how we're going to switch this up is in the second chart I'm going to post up in the show notes, which is what I considered a more appropriate standard. And that is that our self-worth is only partly dependent upon our pursuits and our standards. Only partly, not all the way. And we set reasonable standards, reasonable, appropriate standards. And then we reduce perfectionism by realizing that nothing is perfect. We challenge any kind of perfectionistic thinking. We evaluate our performance objectively. We look for the success. We look for the passion. We look for the creativity. If we don't meet our standards, well, then we ask if our standard was even achievable to begin with. And if it wasn't, we go back to and reset our standards. Or if they were, then we learn from it. We embrace the failure and we say, wow, what a great opportunity that I learned that this didn't work. Now I can really find out what does work. And if we do meet the standards, well, then we feel good for it. And then it plays back into our self-worth and we feel good and we go on with life. Just a very different thing. You need to change the way you think. I've mentioned this quote before from Wayne Dyer, where he says, change the way you think about things and the things you think about will change. In order to overcome perfectionism, you've got to approach life from a different mindset, a different paradigm. So I would encourage you to look at these 2 diagrams I'm going to post in the show notes and start thinking of your life from the second paradigm instead. I think it will help you out greatly. So before we wrap up today, let me give you some listener feedback. I've got some great listener feedback lately in the voicemail that I have up on my website. And I'm so thankful that some of you have left me some voicemail. Thank you so much. This was a great surprise when I logged in and found some people left me some voicemails. And if you haven't tried it, feel free to leave me some voicemails. Sarah sent me a voicemail, and Sarah, I am so sorry. I wanted to play your voicemail, but I think the internet connection was kind of cutting in and out a little bit. So it would have been a little bit hard for people to fully understand what you were saying on there. Sarah sent me a voicemail thanking me for the podcast and how it was speaking to her, how she had gotten caught up on all the episodes. And wow, Sarah, you've listened to me for a very long time. So thanks for listening. That really means a lot to me. You mentioned being a perfectionist. So Sarah, this podcast is dedicated to you. I hope you found it helpful. Let me know. And don't feel awkward. I'm happy to be a part of your journey, no matter where you listen to me. This comment from Blaine.
Hello, I just wanted to say thank you very much for putting your podcast together. I left a comment on your blog. My name is Blaine. It gave me so much perspective, insight as to why I may be doing certain things to set myself up for failure based on past failures, that I may have some learned helplessness that I need to work on. And I just wanted to say thank you. I'd love to speak with you and help and share my experiences in any way that could possibly enable you to expand upon your topics.
Well, thanks, Blaine. I am so happy to know how this show is resonating with you. Keep me informed on your progress, and hopefully we can catch up soon and talk. This question is from Carolyn.
What do you say to people who are constantly giving you negative feedback or body language when you have succeeded in your goals, such as weight loss? Most common phrase is, you should probably stop losing weight. You're really looking a little too thin. Or, why would you want to have another degree when you already have one? What's the purpose? These negative comments and body language can certainly put somebody's positive attitude into a negative one. What is the most appropriate comments for these types of people?
Well, thanks for the question, Carolyn. I would first double check that I know what my first things are. So if I know that, if let's say another degree is part of my first things, then I don't really care what other people think. Now, if they're a friend or a relative, I will personally just say, that's a really interesting perspective. I appreciate you sharing that with me. And if they press me to align with their views, I will often just tell them, you've given me a lot of great ideas. I will certainly think them over. Thanks. But at some point, I might need to utilize some of the techniques that I discussed in my Learning to Say No episode, which is in episode number 9. So I might end up saying, well, thank you so much for caring enough about me that you're worried about this, but I feel like this is something I need to do. And although you might disagree, thank you for your support of me in this decision. I know even if I fall flat on my face, you are a great friend to me, so thank you. And if they persist, then I will start using some of the tools that I mentioned in episode number 9, like the figure 8 or the wet sponge. Now, if this is someone close to me, someone that I love and really value their opinion, someone that I make life with, then I will try to dig out what is really bothering them and try to find a win-win situation if possible. But ultimately, you only live a small amount of time, so you must do what you love. And I think you can be respectful to them. You can be kind to them, but then you can also stand your ground. And I would encourage you to listen to episode number 9 if you hadn't listened to that. I think it will give you some insights and some tools by which to help you address some of those situations. Well, that wraps up this episode on perfectionism. I hope that some of the things that I shared today has resonated with you and you see some practical ideas on how to implement real change in your life. I wanted to thank everyone who has left me some feedback, like Sarah and Blaine and Carolyn did on my voicemail. And for those of you that have left me feedback on iTunes as well, or anything like that, blog posts, you've sent me discussions on those types of things. Thank you for all of that. Really, thank you so much. I wanted to encourage anyone who listens to me on the computer or via an Apple device to please consider subscribing to my podcast. When you pull up my show on iTunes, there is a subscribe button. And this is a great benefit to you as you would be notified anytime I publish a new episode. And it also really helps me out as well. Your ratings and your comments also greatly help me. As I've mentioned several times, I don't make any money off this podcast, and I'm happy to do that. I love that because I love just helping people. To me, helping people is payment enough. But I've actually had a few people write me and ask how they could help. Is there any way that I can help you? And honestly, there are 3 things you can do to help out if you love this show. Number 1, subscribe to it. Number 2, leave me a rating and a comment. And number 3, tell your friends and your family and your coworkers about the show. Like me on Facebook. Follow me on Twitter. Share my podcast link to people. Share my Facebook post. Retweet my tweets. And things like that. That would just be tremendous, and I would love it. Thank you so much for any help you can give me in this area. And by the way, this request is global. I have a lot of great listeners all over the world, from the UK to Germany to Canada to Brazil to Australia and China, all over the place. I would ask all of my listeners overseas for your help as well. Also, I'm really trying to put a lot of the advice I mentioned today into practice. I'm trying to start writing a book right now with a good friend of mine. We will probably write a smaller booklet and just give it away for free here, and also work on a bigger project that hopefully we can get into iBook or Kindle and help even more people with the message of first things. Again, if you have any comments on this episode, I have a discussion area set up at firstthingsproductivity.com/12. So until next time, remember this. Failure is a catalyst of success, not an inhibitor. It is in failure that we often discover the beauty and the innovation. So quit fearing failure so much. Quit muzzling your creativity by your incessant requirement that things be perfect. Remember the song, "Ring the bells that can still ring." Forget your perfect offering. There is a crack in everything. That's how the light gets in. Embrace that light today. Embrace today with passion and intention, and don't die with your music still inside you.